Saddle up your horses.
Pitter patter, let's get at her. It is a special edition of the Manely Broncos Podcast, and we are pleased to be joined by my good friend Sayre Bedinger, the co-host of the Locked On Broncos Podcast with Cody Work, the bite-size Denver Broncos Podcast, or I should say the bite-size daily Denver Broncos Podcast.
David does the Broncos, man.
Right. You also hear him, of course, over there on the Bleacher Report app whenever, he feels like spouting more Broncos stuff. Or if you rather read what he has to say, you could also check it out over there, predominantly orange. I also, Sarah, realized, when I sent you the link for the show, we actually, I don't think I've done a show for 2 years. Isn't that crazy?
Is that right? Holy cow. That's why time really flies, because
Based
that
on the-
feels impossible.
Based on
There's
the,
no way.
I was going to say, based on the StreamYard link that I sent, like it says 2023.
Maybe you sent me one via text or something at some point, because
Yeah.
I feel like I've been on within a year, but either way, that's a long time. So I appreciate you guys letting me infiltrate the show.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. We don't have the full gang, of course. Brandon is in the house. Matty is actually doing he's over at a parenting conference. And the new guy, he's already on really bad footing right now. He missed the show, last week. He did appear for the free agency one, for his debut. But I'm giving him a pass because he was gifted Celtics tickets because the Celtics are in town down there in Florida. So yeah, I'm at least giving him a pass for that one. But nonetheless, we have a lot to talk about, gents. I should say continuing the conversation. And obviously Brandon and I talked a bit about, of course, the news that happened Wednesday. And I know you've been following as much as us and anyone. Take us through this, Sarah. Take us through the emotional roller coaster that was not just obviously the free agency signings of the legal tampering period, to the re-signings, if you will, that the Denver Broncos had.
Yeah, I feel like it was a really good start to free agency. Obviously, when it comes to free agency, we wish that everything could just happen in an instant. And honestly, aren't we kind of lucky that it happens as fast as it does, that it's not drawn out with like one signing every 8 days until the NFL draft or something like that? I mean, that would be torturous. The fact that the ball gets rolling pretty quickly is awesome. And I was really hopeful that the Broncos would be, George Payton said, we want to be measured. You don't want to buy your team every year, things like that. But I was really hopeful that they would be targeted and aggressive for those targets. And so to see them go after the certain guys that they did, even re-signing DJ Jones, which I think flies under the radar because they invested a lot of money in DJ. And so I think from that move to the unrestricted free agents that they signed outside of Denver, Hufanga, Greenlaw, Evan Ingram, it feels like it's been a really successful free agency period so far for this team.
Definitely. I mean, it does feel like I didn't expect us to spend this much, to be honest. Like I kind of figured we'd be buyers in free agency. I knew we would probably get maybe one marquee in air quotes signing, and then a bunch of like in-house guys that have expiring contracts that we bring back, and DJ Jones being one of them. But I really didn't expect there to be like two pretty substantial upgrades to the defense and both 49ers guys coming over. So it's surprising to see how aggressive we were in free agency. But like, I agree. I think it's a good thing. Like I'm glad that we were, and I'm glad that we were able to kind of shore up two fairly big holes on the defense so quickly. But I didn't expect them to, I guess, be this aggressive. I think we still don't have official guarantees on either Hufanga or Dre Greenlaw, and then Evan Ingram we'll talk about. But so maybe they weren't as aggressive as we think. Maybe these are like extremely team-friendly deals that are kind of hidden because we don't know the guarantees. So that might actually be a good thing. But I was personally surprised, but like I agree, I'm glad and excited that we were able to go out and get all three of the kind of bigger name guys we were able to get. But it was just surprising to me to kind of see those fall into place so quickly.
And it's interesting because you look at the free agency, like the first year of Sean Payton, right? You look at the first year of Sean Payton where he addresses like the big needs that they really needed to go after, which was like the offensive line, really addressing it from the inside out, and going out and getting Zach Allen, right? And you kind of compare it now that the quarterback is in, and not just in, but it certainly seems like the track is trending for him to be that franchise quarterback, and he has put all of his chips in. So how would you compare that free agency, which was like the foundational piece that Sean was basically building for, right? Sayre, to now? Because it's like, if almost feels, and I mean, obviously the sexy picks are always going to get it with, Greenlaw, Hufanga, and of course, Ingram. But almost feels like the groundwork had been laid because of that free agency that was instilled with Ben Powers, McGlinchey, and of course, Zach Allen.
Yeah, I think at that point, right, the Broncos, they didn't have a first-round pick or even a second-round pick on their ledger in 2023 for sure, and then they traded up to get Marvin Mims, and then they had the 64th pick in 2022. That was their highest selection. So when Sean Payton came to town, I mean, he had to have clearance from the Walton Penner ownership group to say, like, hey, we don't have picks. Like, I need to go get who I need to raise the floor of this team. I say that phrase all the time, but like when you have a good offensive line, a good defensive line, it just automatically keeps you in tight games, right? And I think we've seen the evidence of that over the last couple of years. Like, yes, the Broncos have been blown out a couple of times, but for the most part, they've been in one-score games. And Sean Payton talks about that. Like, majority of games in the NFL, they're going to come down to one score either way. If you don't have an offensive line, you're cooked. If you don't have a defensive line that can get pressure, you got nothing. So to go out and get those guys, it was very much what everybody said at the time. Oh, I feel like we overpaid for McGlinchey. I feel like we overpaid for Ben Powers. I feel like they settled for Zach Allen. You let Draymond go. So those types of things happen because you have to build something. They had nothing. They were literally the embarrassment. Like, the ownership itself said like it was embarrassing to watch what happened in 2022. So you have to pay to get those guys in on top of not having draft picks. To me, that free agency haul is way more impressive knowing what we knew then, right? Because the Broncos were at the bottom of the barrel. That was, I mean, it wasn't quite Josh McDaniels level of embarrassing the franchise by cheating, but it was close to that, right? And so you feel like that was an even more impressive class to get those guys in there, those foundation pieces, like you said, Cam. And now this one is like the Broncos are a destination again, which that gets me really excited.
What about you, Brandon? Because that was the one conversation we didn't necessarily get to talk about, is like when you do the comparison between the two, it's like the foundation was laid. And especially, of course, you look at the Zach Allen angle, the Zach Allen, Draymond Jones angle of everybody was clamoring for, oh, let's re-sign Draymond Jones. Let's bring him in. Obviously, Brandon, you were very much into the re-signing of the Draymond Jones camp. He in this particular offseason, right? Like this particular offseason, he signs the 2-year, $10 million deal. I want to say it's with the Tennessee Titans. But Zach Allen now, he was arguably a defensive player of the year candidate that kind of flew under the radar for the Denver Broncos. Never even was talked about as a defensive player of the year type of player, but really is expected to be extended. At least that's what we're hoping for probably $25 million a year. So take us through, what you when you look back at that offseason to now, with this free agency and the last one that we had.
I mean, yeah, I was definitely team Draymond Jones. Like, I will proudly admit that. But I was incorrect in that opinion and in that analysis of where we should go in that 2023 free agency offseason. But I mean, I think that's kind of where this really all kind of starts in terms of where we are right now with this team coming off of a double-digit win season, first in a decade, finally getting back to the playoffs. It all started, I think, in that 2023 offseason where they kind of made some moves that weren't really viewed as quote unquote like sexy picks or sexy like signings or like the big splash signings, right? I mean, Ben Powers, a pretty good deal for a guard who was definitely a probably arguably top 10, top 15 guard in the NFL. Very good guard, but that's not like a signing that people freak out about. Like that's not a signing that gets fan bases excited, right? Mike McGlinchey, almost on the other side of the spectrum, where it was viewed as an overpay. It's almost like the signing of Dan Moore that just happened this offseason, where it's kind of like, oh, this guy he's good, but he's not like good enough to warrant that kind of contract, right? And Dan Moore's a little bit different because he was like not really a starter for the Steelers. He was not officially a backup, but he played some snaps for them, whereas McGlinchey was a little bit different. But you see them make moves like that, and then what are they really doing? Like, and obviously the Zach Allen. I mean, that was also the class where we got Alex Singleton, who, for all his faults, has been a decent linebacker for us. Who we're in a room where we've had very, very little for years and years, and it's just kind of like a bunch of almost like, oh, really? They signed that guy, and almost like even a who is that? Who is this? Who is Alex Singleton? Right. If you weren't like an Eagles fan, but it really kind of lended itself to what we saw last year. We were able to give rookie Bo Nix a very, very good offensive line, but it starts with those signings. That's kind of like, again, it's an investment, but it's not going to set off any fireworks. But that's kind of what happens when you invest in both lines on both sides of the ball. But then it kind of sets you up to be able to do something that we were doing this year, where you go get Hufanga, who's more of a risk. You go get Dre Greenlaw, and now I'm in the let's re-sign and keep Zach Allen camp. I don't know how we're going to find the money to do that one, but I was very much wrong in my opinion of Draymond Jones. But yeah, I mean, I think it all started with that offseason in 2023, where we made some signings that were not splashy, but it was able to set us up to make the moves that we were able to make this year. And obviously we're yet to see how the signings we just made are going to pan out. But it's not like, I think the thing that to me that I really like about how we've sort of structured this is we haven't really also lost that many like key players, right? It's not like, I mean, yes, we lost Cody Barton, who played, I think, the most defensive snaps for us on the team last year or something crazy. But I mean, he wasn't a fantastic player for us. So you don't lose anyone that's that huge. So at the very least, you have a team that's still as good as we were last year. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you're able to go and make some of those riskier signings like Hufanga. I'm specifically singling him out because he's, like, in my opinion, the riskiest of the three injury-wise. But if those don't pan out, like, you're not falling off a cliff because of some of the investments that you made before. If they do pan out, then you're like markedly a better defense that was already a top 10 defense. So yeah, I love everything about what we did this year. And I think it started by laying the foundation in prior years.
1,000%. Thank you, Jeff, man. Thank you so
Jeff,
much.
You're the real MVP, man.
Yeah, support the boys. That's what he says, right? And because of that, make sure you hit that subscribe button over there on the MHRT Network page. One of the biggest things that I'm pushing is us to get to 2,000 by the end of the year. And if we get past 2,000 before the end of the year, we just push for 3,000. It's very simple. So again, thank you so much, Jeff.
And one final thing I'll drop in at the end here. I would say this is the same with the Brandon Jones signing last year. Is it kind of another one of those, like, I mean, he's a decent safety. At least that's how he was viewed. Kind of like a not flashy player, but he was just so solid. Like, he's underrated safety. But it continues that theme.
It was one where he was kind of a player that was forgotten about on the depth chart. And I have to ask you, because you posed it, Sayre, because you actually asked of this cycle. I mean, I think you went more off of position, but I think it's so funny when you posed the question about, like, who's the Brandon Jones, like, I think you said safety, or no, you said who's the Brandon Jones player at linebacker or something. I forget what it was that you asked. Yeah. But it's interesting because you could make the argument it's one or two of the players from the 49ers because of not from the forgetting within the depth chart, meaning Dre Greenlock, because everybody knew of the impact. But it's funny saying that who was the Brandon Jones of this free agency cycle? Well, it just so happens that it's another safety in Talanoa Hufanga, who comes in and a player that plays with his hair on fire. And I think it's really easy to throw around the Troy Polamalu comparison because of the way he plays and the versatility that he shows. But I'll just give you credit on that one. Like the Brandon Jones of this sighting was Talanoa Hufanga.
Well, it's fun to have a guy like that in the defense because we know the safety position obviously struggled quite a bit last year down the stretch with the way that PJ Locke played. I think it was kind of amplified later in the year, even though he's had some big moments with the Broncos, but bringing in a guy like Hufanga, I mean, he's got to take Brandon Jones out to dinner or something, because I think the guys that were signed in last year's free agency class that were being signed for borderline pennies on the dollar at the safety position, like, I mean, Justin Simmons got what, $8 million after all he did in Denver or something like that. And the market shifted dramatically this year, not just because, the salary cap went up. No, I think teams saw around the league, like these guys are making a huge impact on games. Like in the Super Bowl, it was pronounced over the course of the regular season, the way that teams are playing against defenses. How important is it nowadays to have safeties who can interchange one another and come into the box and make plays against the run? Because with the too high looks, every other team is just like, all right, we're just going to run at your guys and it'll be best on best. And we know that you have to go light at linebacker because you have to keep up with our speed in the passing game. So now you bring in another enforcer, and I'm going to say that Brandon Jones is an enforcer because the dude hits harder than most guys on the Broncos right now. So you've now got two guys on the back end at safety, and as well as PJ Locke as a third. And if you want to throw JL Skinner's name in there, go ahead. But you've got all these guys now that they can play that too high safety look, but they can also attack downfield with that sort of, heat-seeking missile mentality. And I think that helps your defense be way more multiple because you can still give the too high looks, but you're not a liability against the run. So that's where I think Hufanga can be such a big addition to this defense. Is now you've got teams can't run to one side or the other. They're going to face, basically it's going to feel like they're playing against 12 guys with the way that those two play the game.
Yeah, they're playing in a stacked box every time, even if it's not a stacked box.
Right.
I mean, and this is a player who, was an all-pro. Like he was a first-team all-pro in 2022. And then he kind of continued a little bit in 2023, a player who really plays all over the field. And I mentioned this on Wednesday's show, Sayre, but it reminds me of, we play this so often of the what if scenarios, and I it's because of the Marvel series What If, but we play a lot of what if scenarios just in general. But it reminds me of the what if of what could have been with Caden Stearns, PJ Locke, and then Brandon Jones in the mix. Because now that you have, and it's kind of a two-parter, but now that you have Talanoa Hufanga in here, and you have a decent or reasonable deal that with PJ Locke signed, it's looking really good in the sense of like Locke is probably earning safety 3 money looking at what that is. So he's either going to be a cut candidate, heading into training camp, but nonetheless, the versatility of that room, I think, is one where it just brings me of the what if to what the Broncos could have had with Caden Stearns.
That's a crazy thing to think about. You forget going back to last year, that was what everyone was kind of excited about was, we've got the 3 Longhorns back there and all these Texas guys, and what a difference a year makes at even just one position on an NFL roster. Like Caden Stearns, I don't even know if he's in the league right now, and that's kind of crazy to think about. And so I'm interested to hear what your guys' thoughts are as far as, okay, last year, Broncos, they're number 3 in the NFL in total defense, or in terms of points allowed, right? Number 1 in the NFL in sacks. First of all, like, do you guys actually think that they can repeat that this year with their personnel? Because I know some people they're not as high on Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper. I've heard from some people that they feel like this last year was sort of a mirage. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't agree with that, but I want to get your guys' takes on that, because do you think this defense can jump up to the best in the NFL? I mean, that's what people are kind of putting on paper right now, is that Broncos were already number 3 last year. They could be the best this year. Like, what does that look like to you guys to get up to number 1? Obviously allowing the fewest points, but I mean, what are those guys going to bring in terms of the impact on an every game basis that you feel like is going to take that jump to the next level?
Go ahead, Brandon.
I mean, that's a great question. I think a lot of it is going to sort of depend on the production of the players on the edge, and specifically just on the defensive line in general. Because, was that like a flash in the pan year from Nick Bonito? I don't know. Yeah. Goes up to having like 13 and a half sacks for a while there, is tied with Trey Hendrickson for the most in the league. And, I don't know if that's going to continue this next year, but at the bottom line, like, you have to continue to be able to get after the quarterback. And like, that was something that, this year was pretty much the first year we've seen that we've actually been able to do that with some sort of consistency. And not only that, we obviously led the league in sacks, but it feels like before this year, it was kind of like, well, we're missing that guy. We're missing maybe more than one of those guys that can consistently do that for you. And we have been missing it pretty much since we had Von Miller. So that was definitely a nice surprise to see this last season. But does that continue? I think that's going to be the biggest question, because you're able to fill up the rest of the holes. And like, you had good safety play from Brandon Jones. PJ Locke was a little bit of a liability, so you sort of fill that with Hufanga, and I'm just gonna like act like all of these guys are gonna be healthy and playing the full season. I don't see anywhere on this defense that is not going to be improved. I mean, yes, we lost Cody Barton, but that's not a gigantic loss. And then we also get Dre Greenlaw to be that enforcer at the linebacker spot in the middle of the defense. And I just think like that's something we've been missing for years, to be honest, years and years. So I think it all kind of hinges on, are we able to continue to get after the quarterback as consistently as we were able to? And if we can, then I don't see any reason why we couldn't be the number 1 defense in the league. But if that does fall off, like that, you can't, I just don't think it's possible to be the best defense in the league if you're not able to get after the quarterback. And that's just bottom line. I mean, you even saw a guy like John Franklin Myers, who led the league in like pressures from the interior, which is crazy. Yeah. Like beating out guys like, Chris Jones. So to me, it's all about, does that defensive line in its entirety continue with their dominance against opposing quarterbacks? And if they can, even if there's like a little bit of a fall off, I'm not saying we have to lead the league in sacks again. I'm not saying that Nick Bonito has to get 13 and a half sacks again, but if there's some sort of consistency there and we're able to just maintain that consistent pressure, then I don't see any reason why we couldn't be. Like, to me, that's going to be the number 1 thing.
Well, and I think that's like, for me, it's one of the reasons why continuing to add to the defensive line, maybe the interior, it isn't, the worst thing in the world, right? So like, even though the fact you have DJ Jones to the deal that got scrutinized and everything, having DJ Jones, I would still add another vet body to the room, basically kind of do what they did last year, if you will, bring in that extra body that Sean maybe has familiarity with, or just an extra vet body. And, maybe that can come, after the draft, or just before, but even in the draft, go out and, get a young defensive lineman that you could possibly even groom, so that it could allow you that if you do need to move on from DJ Jones or a John Franklin Myers, you could just plug and play right then and there. And that's what made the Eagles just such a fun defense and like the blueprint for the NFL going forward, because they could rotate players in and out on a defensive line. So I think that also too, it also goes to show how impressive the Broncos were as a defense because of the inefficiencies at linebacker, and of course safety, but specifically linebacker. And you look at the Eagles, one of the main reasons why they were also so good was Zach Bond and Oren Burks, the two linebackers or it was more so Burks because he was able to fill in, and for the linebacker, the Georgia linebacker it's escaping me right now. But he filled in for him and he did quite well. Like they didn't miss a beat, and when you have that kind of camaraderie, I think it's going to be a big deal. So the fact that you will have great linebacker play, at least what it appears on paper, is really, I think, what's going to be standing out more to the idea that the run defense and specifically the physicality getting to the quarterback will be there now because you have more consistency from that defensive line and that linebacker spot.
I mean, another thing too that I'll just throw out there. Obviously, I kind of alluded to, yes, I think this could be the number one defense in the NFL if we stay healthy, but that's going to be the biggest thing because, like, when we lost Riley Moss, we all saw what that did to this defense, specifically when we had to put he who shall not be named back there against the Browns. So I think that's going to also be like a huge, obviously, factor. And we just signed specifically one player who that's a question mark for him in general. So, that's going to factor into it as well. But I do think that specifically having Dre Greenlaw kind of be that guy for you at linebacker is going to be, and even just again the way that Hufanga plays, you're going to be able to do more against the run than we did before. And that was another thing that kind of just like screwed us in terms of, down the stretch, the defense wasn't quite as good, specifically against the Bills, but obviously that's a playoff game that doesn't necessarily count as the regular season. But I mean, health is a big part of it, but Dre specifically, I think, will help against the run, and then obviously the way that Hufanga plays. But Riley Moss, you need to take another big step, and please stay healthy.
For real. I'd be interested to see if the Broncos, with Riley Moss's situation, I mean, do they do that on the offensive side of the ball? I was just talking with Cody on today. Well, I guess it's for tomorrow's episode, but kind of just the approach at wide receiver that we're seeing from Mike Kliss that he said that the Broncos really like their young guys at receiver, kind of reiterating what's been pointed out a number of times this offseason. I'm interested to find out if there's a Riley Moss on offense, this year, because last year, a lot of folks were ticked off about the fact that Riley Moss was getting penciled in as a starter in the offseason. And people are saying, no, I don't even know if he's an outside corner. He might even be a safety, this, that, and the other. And we saw how it all unfolded. You put a lot of confidence in the guy. I get that there's like the money ball aspect of things with the $90 million in dead cap last year. And, you want to bring that mentality to the locker room of, hey, we're young and hungry, and young and hungry doesn't know what they don't know. And That's great, for a year in which you have $90 million in dead cap. But how do you approach that in an offseason, and specifically at wide receiver, where Bo Nix's development is now critical in terms of taking that next step? And there's no wasted time to me. Like, you can't waste time saying, well, by 2026 we'll be this, or by 2027 everything's going to be like, there's no such thing as a perfect roster in the NFL. There's no such thing as ideal circumstances. Like, yes, the perfect storm can happen, but I think at wide receiver, we may be getting another Riley Moss sort of a situation, because the Broncos just passed on Cooper Kupp, as has been pointed out. They didn't want to trade for Deebo Samuel, even though he was legitimately wanted to come. Yeah. So I'm interested with your guys' opinion on this. Like, is Sean going to put his chips in the table at a crucial position for the Broncos in terms of, okay, this is this year's Riley Moss, whether it's Troy Franklin or somebody else?
What I think that when you look specifically at the room and we say who's the Riley Moss of the room, you don't have to look no further than Troy Franklin, because of the season he had, how scrutinized he was, and everything. It seems like he's the easy choice, and probably the right choice. And also, too, I think his ceiling is actually rather high. I mean, like, we're talking about a player, yeah, he was taken in the 4th round, but like we're talking about a player that, was mixed reviews. So like a player that was also graded at a 1st round, coming out of Oregon. So, and I mean, we were even speculating, Brandon, I think at some points where what are your nightmare scenarios? And obviously one of them happened with, Worthy, to the Chiefs, but another one was Troy Franklin to the Chiefs. Like that was one of our, nightmare type of, scenarios. But I just think that he's a player that, he's a really good one because like in regards to the point, because it's like, I don't think there's a wrong answer to it. Like, when Cliff mentions or, when even Ben Albright has mentioned about like the development of the room, I don't think that that's a bad thing. Like, I mean, because like, you think back to everything that has gone on in the past for this Denver Broncos room. We all felt like the Broncos in the past, under like the Jerry Judys of the world and in that room, they always had a really good room. It just was never developed, right? Like it was never developed. We would always say that. So I don't think it's wrong to say, you know what, let's go develop that room. And you certainly saw the progression of Marvin Mims and, Troy Franklin here and there as things were progressing. But I also don't think, because of what you said about Bo Nix and the beginning of the trajectory of what is your franchise quarterback, you can't sit pat and sit on your hands and basically say, you know what, I think our wide receiver room is good, and basically say no, to the idea of a wide receiver in general. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the same adage of, sometimes like what we heard this offseason, which was, they're just the moves that they're going to make is just the extensions or something like that. Like that's all they're going to do. That didn't exactly happen. I mean, they didn't sign offensive players, but they were still aggressive. They went out and got Dre Greenlaw, Talafunga, Hopanga. We'll get to Evan Ingram. So it certainly seems like they are pushing all the chips in the basket of being aggressive. So it's just like, might as well continue that theme and kick the tires, as was mentioned, maybe Brandon Cooks, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen. I know Cody has mentioned him before, Keenan Allen. So bring in some of those players that you feel like would gel in a locker room, and a good vet specifically for guys like Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin.
One thing that kind of makes me this kind of makes me think about with the apparent like large need at wide receiver and our lack of really any kind of move that has been made there, at least in the offseason and free agency, which is kind of interesting because Peyton did say on when he had the interview with Kay Adams on Up and Adams, like he placed the veteran wide receiver position into he didn't put in the must-haves, like this is an absolute need for us, but he did say it was a need, so that's a little surprising. The thing though that makes me think about is obviously we've heard about him speak about the Joker, which I have spoken about before, but
you moved on Twitter already?
Why so serious?
I'm just so tired of that term, but it just makes me wonder, is the I guess happiness with the current state of the wide receiver room and the lack of urgency that seems to have been shown there in improving that room specifically. I don't know if that says more about how they view the wide receivers that they already have, although I'm not saying it says nothing about them. To me, it might signal more of we're not even going to feel like we need to rely on our wide receivers as much as we had to do this past year. And by that, I mean, get a tight end that can actually do anything for you, which we've sort of started to do in Evan Ingram, and get a running back who can catch passes, because the big two names that you always think about in I spoiled it, in Sean Payton's system is the Alvin Kamara and Jimmy Graham type players who both had pretty consistently over 100 targets for the quarterback that Sean Payton was coaching at that time, whether it was primarily Drew Brees, but there were some other ones that were in there. So to me, it's like, is it really we love the wide receivers that we have? Maybe, but some of it also could be, we're going to try to get a running back in this draft class that has embarrassment of riches at running back that can maybe be an 80 target guy, a 90 target guy for us. We're going to get a tight end that can do more than catch 25 passes for 200 yards, which is what it feels like we've had every single year.
Nobody even did that. Nobody even got there.
Not even that. I know. Wasn't it like no one had more than 25 catches or something? 188.
Troutman had 188. And
I rounded up for
led with 19 catches, dude. That's insanity.
I rounded up just to make myself feel slightly better. But like that's not a tight end that should be in the NFL. Like that's just not a tight end room that should exist on a professional football team. Like you have to get more out of that position. And with what we've seen from what Sean likes, it's going to be maybe a lot more. So to me, that just makes me think, is it because they're trying to integrate more than just a wide receiver into this offense? Like they want that running back that can catch a lot. They want that tight end that can catch a lot and actually do something.
So yeah, I think that's a great point, because you look at the best offenses that New Orleans had, I mean, back in the day, and they all had a number of guys, right, from top to bottom. It wasn't just Marcus Colston. It was all the way down the depth chart to Lance Moore, and those types of players, Devery Henderson, Ted Ginn Jr., all these guys making contributions, which I think is so important, because you have the offense filter through a couple of guys. And what does that do to a defense every single week? It forces them to fixate on those guys. And so that's where the wide receivers have to be capable, as we saw that they were not against Buffalo. That's what gets me riled up about this topic is Sean Payton said right after that game, didn't even take him 24 hours to sit on it. He says right after that game, like, we got to find a way to start hosting these kinds of games. And what he means by that is we've got to win the AFC West, because there's no way to host a playoff game unless you win your division. It's a simple, math. So the obvious to me is to upgrade the floor of the room and say, look, we're not going to be worse than this guy out there, right? And that might be Amari Cooper. That might be, Brandon Cooks, as was mentioned in the chat. That might be Keenan Allen. All three of those guys, by the way, have ties to the Broncos coaching staff in one way or another, because Keenan Allen played for Joe Lombardi. And then obviously Brandon Cooks was drafted by Sean. And Amari Cooper has the connection to Kerry Colbert, the wide receivers coach from back at Alabama. So there's a number of players out there that, if you want to say, hey, it's the ties that bind in the NFL, then go get one of these guys and feel free to cut them, just like you did Tim Patrick, just like you did to Josh Reynolds. Like, the Broncos weren't afraid to waste their time with those guys, So, and what did Josh Reynolds do immediately upon the start of the regular season? He was one of the guys that was actually making plays out there. I know he had his drops as well, but I mean, he was actually making plays at wide receiver. And I felt like they could have used him for the playoff run. I still don't understand why they didn't keep him around. So, I mean, I think there is a level to this of, hubris in terms of we're going to make this happen. Just like with Greg Dulcich, like, he was being called the Joker 2 years ago at OTAs. And so that's how things go sometimes in the NFL, is just you put your chips in the middle of the table on one guy and it doesn't work out. But to me, I feel like that is still an area that, whether the draft and even if it is, free agency, I feel like you set yourself up to say, all right, our room is not going to be worse than, Cortland Sutton and this guy, and then Marvin Mims or whoever's your other most proven guy at this point. That's where I feel like you can't go into the regular season, because then otherwise, what are you? You're one injury away from potentially being in the same exact spot that we're fearing right now on the show in March 14th. So, I mean, I would say, guys, like, from what I've heard, and I talk to people, I don't really talk about it much, but from what I hear, that's going to happen at some point later this month, or potentially early in April, but sometime before the draft. I think somebody's going to come in. And I think my opinion, from what I'm gathering, is that it's going to be somebody that's like appreciably better than a Josh Reynolds type of player.
So you're saying of the Brandon Cookses of the world, the Keenan Allens of the world,
right?
The Amari Coopers. Well, I will say, and if it's Amari Cooper, I will say, not to toot my own horn, but I will have gone 2 for 2 on the Manely Broncos predictions for offense and defense. But let's go forward with Evan Ingram, because as much as we talk about that Joker. And if you haven't muted it on Twitter yet, I'm disappointed in you. The word Joker.
I like the joke. What's wrong with the Joker? I like
love
it.
It's just so I hear it every 2 seconds. It's the new Let's Ride.
I'm so surprised that because it's been talked about since Sean came to Denver. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people are just now picking up on it for the first time, which is why it's now oversaturating out there. So you're right, but it's so fascinating because we've been talking about it. This is the third straight off season we've been talking about it.
So we did touch on the running back stuff briefly, but I gotta say, and Brandon did touch on this a little bit too, is I don't think the Joker stuff is done necessarily, because he did say a running back wide receiver, because like when you look at that running back room, between that room specifically and of course the tight end room, they brought in Evan Ingram, who you could use in a lot of different ways, truly, like as an athletic freak finally for the first time since really Julius Thomas, if we're being real. So what I'll translate it to you. So if Sayre and Brandon, when you look at the other Joker side being the running back room, what is your ideal perfect scenario of a running back room going forward from now to the NFL draft?
Before the draft, that's a tall order question. There's not that many guys out there that are available anymore, to be honest, to try to pick up. I don't think I see them making many or any moves at running back before the draft. Like, I think it's not the ideal room, but in my kind of just like view of this, I think we're going to have the guys that we have right now until we get to April, late April. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think they're going to go invest heavily in that position in one of the best drafts to want to try to do that, and go do it. I wouldn't be surprised at all. I'd be surprised if we didn't.
See, we're celebrating on stream. But you're saying the ideal perfect scenario for you, Brandon, is drafting two backs.
Draft two backs. I mean, look, do you want to go out and get a J.K. Dobbins, which like I would hate, just to be honest, because like he's look, J.K. Dobbins is just yet another, like, you want to make this the injury roulette free agency.
He did
go get J.K. Dobbins.
He did have good but a good season last year.
I'd rather draft two guys. I'd rather just go get two young guys in a draft class that's full of them. Rookie running backs produce. That's been true. It's a tale as old as time.
Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler style, back to back.
I mean, Hampton Henderson would be absolutely crazy. Yeah. There's no way that happens. But I would absolutely love it. I would freak out if that was 20 and 51. I wouldn't even care. It would be so fun. I mean, I don't think that would happen, but it would be sweet.
So before we go
I'm in that. Give me two rookies. That's what I want.
So then, before we go to Sayre, because it is the idea, and you want to draft two, what's your ideal, like your perfect pairing?
Still for me, of those two. I mean, can I just pick? Can I pick the best two in the class? Man, that's such a crazy question. It depends entirely on like what you're trying to go for. There's so many guys like, I mean, if it is a Hampton Henderson, I mean, that'd be crazy. There's no way that happens realistically though. So like maybe it's like a Travion Henderson and an RJ Harvey. Maybe it's a Travion Henderson and a Devin Neal. Maybe it's Caleb Johnson and a Devin Neal. Just pick two. There's so many good running backs in this draft class. Like I can sit here and probably give you 6 different pairings and I would love all of them. They're so good. I mean, again, it just goes entirely with what are you trying to get out of that room, and like what are you wanting? Because if it is going to be more of the like, okay, we want to like have running backs that can be a massive weapon in the passing game for us and soak up, 60, 70, 80 targets, right? Then maybe you try to go for like Travion Henderson and like the Devin Neal kind of combo. Maybe you want to kind of go more as like a major bruiser that can be like your kind of workload back and take 300 carries, and then you still get a guy that can do a little bit for you in the passing game. Maybe that's like you get Caleb Johnson and then you try to go get RJ Harvey. I don't know, but there's so many different combinations that like you could sell me on a lot of them, but it just depends entirely on like what does Sean Payton want from that room, and that's going to be fascinating to figure out the answer to based on what he does there, and if he does go for two, who he picks, I think is going to tell us a lot of like, well, this is what I'm wanting from this room. Mm-hmm. But there's so many that throw two darts and you're probably going to be happy because there's 20 draftable guys that could all start for you at running back. It's crazy. So,
but you're saying Hampton and Henderson in essence. That's like your ideal.
Hampton and Henderson would be crazy. That would be fun.
Sayre, I don't mean to put you on the spot. You know how much we've been through in the years, with Nebraska and Iowa, and but is this Caleb Johnson hive time? Is this kind of where I'm leading this to?
I mean, you guys know who the best running back in this draft class is at running against a stacked box. When every team plays against Iowa every year, it doesn't matter because Kirk Ferentz is the head coach. Every single team that plays against Iowa knows exactly what they're going to do offensively. It's the Pat Shurmur special. It's run, maybe pass. And so what he brings to the table is a guy that you can feed against a completely stacked box. And if teams aren't going to stack the box against the Broncos, look at his numbers when teams didn't stack the box against Iowa. I know that was probably last year was the solar eclipse. I bet you there was at least one more non-stacked box that Caleb Johnson faced than that. But look, he's the best when it comes to running against a stacked box because that was his job at Iowa. That's what he was tasked with doing every single play. All right, Caleb, go ahead. They're stacking the box. We need you to go make a play. We need you to go churn out some yards after contact. We need you to go do this, that, and the other. He's the best in this class at facing the stacked box. He's the best when the opposite is true. And so my ideal scenario, Cam, I've said this a number of times, like go give me the Ohio State guys. I would love to have those two guys on the team. And I think that's relatively realistic, but I also don't think it's unrealistic to say, give me Caleb Johnson and one of the Ohio State guys as well. I mean, if you're really going early round backs, multiple of these guys, I don't think that's impossible. But to me, because of what he brings to the table, if teams are daring the Broncos to throw the ball, like Caleb Johnson is the guy who's faced that the most, to say, all right, you're daring us to throw. I'm going to be the guy that makes you pay for that and bleed out the clock or just grind out, a first down on 3 straight carries. Like that's what he can do. So that would be my sales pitch for Caleb Johnson for sure.
When Caleb Johnson didn't face a stacked box, he only accounted for 40% of the total offensive yards from the Hawkeyes.
Only.
That's it.
I gotta say though, like
Caleb Johnson and Henderson would be.
I will say, I've said it to Sayre numerous times, but it's just like if Ashton Jeanty did not have the year that he had, we would be talking far more about what Caleb Johnson did, the boxes and everything. It's to a much higher degree, but it's like basically what happened with, Blake Corum, that one year with, I forget the one back, who was so high. Was it Bijan
Edwards?
Or no, was it Bijan? It might've been Bijan. But like this, but yeah, Caleb Johnson, man, I would love Caleb. I think if you're talking like free agency to the draft, the ideal one with free agency and in the draft, you mentioned Ohio State Buckeye boys. I actually love the idea of Brandon's going to hate me because he hates the signing, but J.K. Dobbins and going out and getting Trevion Henderson, like in the draft.
My thoughts on the free agent backs, Cam. I mean,
Yeah.
you've seen me in the chat.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that idea at all, because you bring in somebody as a free agent and you're saying, what you're effectively saying is that, okay, we could still draft somebody, but we're going to now be taking away carries from Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime, or opportunities for guys that you already drafted or signed that you want to develop. Now we're going to take away carries from that guy because we got J.K. Dobbins as a bandage here. But it's like my kids have the Band-Aids that have the Disney characters on it, and you know how crappy those Band-Aids are. The first sign of water spilling on it, you're like, frick, I need to get a new Band-Aid. Like, this one doesn't work anymore. That's what this running back class in free agency is to me, is the Band-Aids with the characters on it, to where you're like, hey, like, look, J.K. Dobbins, like, look, Dad, my Band-Aid has Bluey on it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to give you a new Band-Aid in like 10 minutes, So why not just use the skin colored bandage, like an actual Band-Aid, that's gonna work, I don't know, maybe that's a terrible analogy, but I just feel like that's exactly what it is like, we're going to free agency to sign this guy who's going to be around for 1 year, and we're going to be talking about running backs in next year's draft because we signed J.K. Dobbins this year. So I don't know. That's my rant about free agent running backs this year in particular, not like last year.
But all the Broncos people on Twitter that were all hating on the idea of getting Najee Harris in free agency. Well, guess who Najee Harris just replaced for the Chargers? You want that guy?
Maybe. But I just think that the whole idea behind it, though, is I want the best room possible, and I think that Sean. So like, and I think I've said this too in our chats here, but it's just like Sean ascribes to the idea of running backs matter. He just goes about it a bit of a different way. Like, he goes to more of like the conditioned way. Like, he's not necessarily like, maybe one that's going to be abiding by the 3-down running back type of player. He may draft a 3-down running back player, but due to his longevity, due to the conditioning and making him a better running back in the NFL, he's going to be building the best possible room of guys like, just for scenario's sake, a Quinshon Judkins or a Trevion Henderson, putting both of them in the room. And then you have Henderson, Judkins, Estime, Jaleel, and then Blake Watson in that mix. You can't tell me that, like, at that point, that running back room is massively upgraded at that point. So it's just like, it's more about the notion that I think Sean massively wants to upgrade that room. And that's kind of like one of the ideas, like, it's hard for me to ignore that, like, they at least bring a body in. And I think that maybe what it is like, it may not be before the draft. It actually could be after the draft, depending on what they do or don't do from that running back position in the draft.
And see, right now, I think they could get to OTAs or even training camp with the running backs that they have. Like, they have Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime, Tyler Bidet, and Blake Watson already on the team. So you already have the number of guys that you don't necessarily need to say, well, we need a body out there, because you don't need a body out there. You have guys, and like, legitimately could probably go into a regular season if you had an injury to your top guy. Like, you could legitimately go week 1 that this is our running back stable for this week, with what the Broncos currently have. Now, is that ideal? Absolutely not. But the thing to me is that, like, I know we've had this discussion before. Well, you're sacrificing in the draft, or you're not sacrificing in the draft based on signing somebody. So would you rather have J.K. Dobbins and Caleb Johnson, or would you rather have, Quinshon Judkins and Caleb Johnson? Would you rather have Rico Dowdle and whoever, or would you rather have, the two guys in the draft? I mean, that's the game that you're playing, is not to say, well, if we sign J.K. Dobbins, we can't draft Caleb Johnson. I know that's not true, but if you sign a guy like J.K. Dobbins, then you're not drafting two guys, which to me is the right strategy in this class. And so I don't think critical mass is a problem for the Broncos at this point at running back. And therefore I would say, like, let's go get two of these guys that you protect and hedge all bets. You say we think this guy could be the lead back, but if he's not, it's going to be this guy. Just like Sean hedged his bets with, he always references the draft with Pierre Thomas, right? He's like, we took a guy in the 4th round and we signed Pierre after the draft, and Pierre ended up making the roster. The 4th round guy didn't even make the team. So I'm just throwing that out there as like hey, that's where I think your critical mass comes from.
Ray mentions, speaking about the running back, are we going away from wanting a fullback on the roster? So this was kind of like a thought that I also had the moment Evan Ingram signed, is that I wonder, are we going away from the idea of a fullback and maybe to more of the idea, obviously Juice is still out there in free agency, Kyle Juszczyk, which would be fun. But they might have a Walmart version of Kyle Juszczyk on the roster with Nate Atkins. So the idea that, maybe they are going to be going away from the this type of scheme. And, this comparison's been thrown around ever since draft day. The idea that we might be seeing a bit more of a Oregon offense, if you will, or the Drew Brees type of offense that, Sean Payton has been rather accustomed to working with, which is a bit more pass heavy, more spread, if you will, getting a little bit more of the lion's share of targets to a lot of the players, wide receivers, running backs. Are we looking at the idea, Brandon and Sayre, that maybe they don't have a fullback and then you're actually talking about more Nate Atkins agenda?
I mean, look, I'm pretty positive that we probably are set with the idea of having a fullback at that room. Like, if you wanted to get a guy who was going to be like a dedicated fullback for you, we would have seen more interest from the team in like Juszczyk being released. And even though he's like 32, the fact that there was just seemingly very little to no interest, I think they're fine with Nate Atkins. I don't really think that they view it as a must-have on this team, and I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the ability to get Juszczyk and you don't. Like,
right.
Do you care then?
Right, exactly. And I mean, Burton is out there, and I think those types of guys will be out there. I mean, it's also important to remember that like Burton was cut, at roster cuts, put on the practice squad and shuffled up. So that type of stuff. I mean, that I'm not saying that role is not important to Sean Payton. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look up how many snaps Burton played last year to see, but I mean, the Broncos have the jumbo personnel. They have the fullback. They have, obviously now with Evan Ingram, you actually have a joker. So how much does that affect your usage of a fullback in this offense in terms of the looks that you're giving defenses? Because I don't know necessarily that it really does. I'm sure Sean would still like to have that variance out there, but like they prioritized bringing back Matt Parrott. We know that. So, I mean, the jumbo package is probably still going to be in the mix. But the fullback at this point, I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I wonder if they could find somebody that they could stash on the practice squad and shuffle him up if they don't want somebody like a Juszczyk who's, obviously perennial all-pro at the position.
The other part, the two-parters of, is of course, the fullback is a dying breed, but also, Sean Payton with Burton probably could sign Burton at any point, like really probably. At any point, at any point, whether it's now to probably just before training camp or just after the draft, he could sign him at any point.
At what point did they pick up this trend of guys who can play both ways too? Because I mean, Harbaugh's got both Harbaugh brothers have a guy that can play both ways. They can play D-line, play some fullback for you, catch passes. Like, I don't know. I mean, that's another interesting proposition to say, all right, well, Burton plays fullback and, special teams. What if you get a guy who plays fullback, D-line, and special teams, right? So, I mean, open up the options here. I've said this before. Let's kind of be moving away from the bring all the former Saints in. Give me all the guys that I know really well. Let's start doing some more of the innovating, right? And maybe following the new trends.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to be worth talking about this, but it'll be a fun little wrinkle of this offense is going to be how they use Evan Ingram. Do they use him like they used Marvin Mims at times out of the backfield, in some of those creative ways. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Any final words, Sayre, as we are wrapping up the show here with Broncos free agency and everything? Do you have any final words?
Broncos are back. I love it. It's fun. We get to talk about a team that just made the playoffs, a team that's got a franchise QB. So it's fun times for all of us that are covering the Broncos. So I love it.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Brandon, do you have any final thoughts?
Let's bow.
Let's bow. I do see the Dante Thornton question, and actually that reminds me. So next week it seems fitting, Brandon, that we do a mock draft. We probably should do a mock draft for like where do they go from here after free agency? Maybe kind of like looking into the draft of some of the guys, and maybe we should actually do it like of what we think happens, and in terms of like versus like what we actually want to happen. So maybe we'll do a mock draft here next week. As far as my final word, there's no other final word to say than this.
Let's go Broncos! God bless Bo Nix!
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flame out. So high, I might never come